Hi, my name's Andrew, and 20 years ago I worked on this game called Roller Coaster Tycoon 3. What I'm going to do today is play some of the early missions, perhaps, and see what I remember about the game, and perhaps share some memories about working on the game and what it was like. And I'm joined by Stuart, who also worked on the game, and I believe
Hello.
you also worked on the RCT2 expansion packs.
Yeah, so I worked on Wacky World and Time Twister.
Yeah.
Um, that was the sort of first games I actually professionally worked on.
Mm.
Originally, I was hired in to do game balancing as tester, but then there needed to be more support on the actual development. So I came in house and was sort of a designer, sort of a programmer on the expansion packs for a little bit of time.
Yeah,
Um,
because I was just going to say, because Frontier, they had a kind of association with Roller Coaster Tycoon. It was because so Chris Sawyer made the original RCT 1 and 2, and he had worked before with David Braben, who was the boss of Frontier. So, in fact, I think Chris Sawyer did the PC version of Frontier Elite 2. And then I think Frontier's first involvement with the actual Roller Coaster Tycoon series was the Xbox version of the original Roller Coaster Tycoon, which was done by Frontier. So then I guess it's kind of seemed logical for Frontier to take on more stuff in terms of future RCT games. And then when we did RCT3, that was going to be the first game in 3D in the series, and that's not practical for one person such as Chris Sawyer to do on their own. Especially as, by the way, you're seeing some weird screenshots here, which are probably from 20 years ago, but the game kind of cycles through some of the screenshots as well as kind of predefined images that you've taken. Chris Sawyer did these original games, and then Frontier took on the third game in the series to make it properly 3D. So what I'll do to begin with is I'll go play. Let's have a look at the first mission of the game. I don't remember how long it takes, but let's try it out.
I
Just
have
create a new
been.
career.
It's going to be quite short.
Yeah, create a new career. Player 1, that's fine. So load this career, okay. So this is called Vanilla Hills. I think that's, oh yeah, start a new game. I'm trying to remember this user interface.
Yeah, I think you can take them in any order, those first five, and then as you complete them, more unlock.
Is it a question of like having to unlock stars for like, or like gaining stars to unlock missions, or is it like, you gain 5 stars and you do this, you get this to play this next mission, or is that, I don't remember how it works.
I can't quite remember. I think maybe you have to complete up to gold, maybe to unlock it.
Yeah. So one thing about RCT3 that was quite different from the previous games was the it was like the mission structure. Like it was a lot more forgiving because the early games, like they had missions like, you must repay your loan by year 3, or it's like, or you lose the mission, and if you lose you have to start again. Whereas these missions were a lot more kind of just take all the time you need and eventually you'll reach the goal, and well done. So it was definitely easier. I kind of prefer the original kind of the way it works in the original games, but it's definitely like not for everyone, because it's definitely more kind of for people who are into management, and I know like some people just want to build rides and so on. So I don't know if you have a kind of feeling about that kind of aspect of it.
I don't remember if you have to do much here to get bronze. I think if you just leave it running, it kind of does the bronze itself.
Yeah. Well, there's been criticism. Obviously, the Planet Coaster 2 has come out recently, and there was criticism of both that and Planet Coaster 1 that it's not really so much a management game. It's more of a kind of, obviously a designing game and a kind of scenery, making your own nice, cool looking parts with cool scenery kind of game. So obviously, again, different things for different people, but I do like a kind of management game myself. I feel like this is a different. Is this a different park from the one I thought was the first mission? Because like I'm sure there was. Maybe I'm misremembering. It's been a long time. I feel like there was a mission where I might try some of the other ones in a moment, like to see what other ones there are. I mean, let's see what the missions are or the objectives are. But I remember there was a particular problem we had in the early. Where even are the objectives? This cup thing. So guess in park 400, park value 20,000. I guess we'll see. Okay, it already shows us the other ones. It's just park value and guess in park. Let's try to get to apprentice. So I think the park number of guests is just based on primarily like how many rides you have. Because we have this park rating. I did do some of the code for this, but I don't really remember exactly how it all works. So we have £10,000, which I assume we started with that, so it looks like it's going up at the moment. So I guess you can probably just fast forward and I don't know how quickly it would actually reach 400, but if I put down some more rides, it would presumably reach that a lot quicker. Let's do. If I just zoom in.
I think you pick the right ride, you can almost do the whole scenario within seconds.
I'll do a ride first, then we'll have a look at some of the management stuff later on, maybe. So if I go to, let's do a flat ride first. I note also that we do have access to the pools and the kind of animals, like animal enclosures from the expansion packs. So we could even include those in this park if we wanted to.
Yeah.
Let's do so which of these is flat rides? Gentle rides?
Well,
are these all tracked rides? Because I don't even remember.
Yeah, the flat rides come under different categories. So I think there's like thrill.
Oh, I see. So junior rides. Okay, so let's do a merry.
Yeah, any of those are flat rides.
I've realised my mistake already that if I put the queue here, the queue can only be one tile, or rather the entrance. If I do it here, I can have it kind of go around, and I could just have them leave onto there. So
it doesn't need to be for that kind of ride.
If I do that one, because people used to have like the kind of queue like snake around. Like if I go like this, you can get like more kind of capacity, if that makes sense. Which I guess you can do that as well. That makes sense. Yeah, that's fine. Because I tried Planet Coaster 2 the other day, and I'm not sure if you can actually do that. I see, maybe you can, but I didn't try all the different kind of queue tools. I just remembered I've clicked on this, and I remember the GUI is in the bottom right, like the actual interface, which I didn't really see at the first, with this higher resolution that we have these days. Because when we were developing this game, probably most of us would have been running a resolution of something like 800 by 600 or 1024 by 768 or something like that. So obviously the interface was a lot bigger to actually see, and it doesn't actually scale in this version. This is the complete edition, but it doesn't scale the user interface.
Well, there's all CRT monitors. I remember that, and I had trouble getting even like dual monitors. But
that was almost unheard of back then. Dual monitors. So one thing I do like about the RCT games that I didn't really hear in Planet Coaster was this kind of cha-ching noise when people go on the ride. It's quite satisfying, and you really get like a sense you're actually earning money. I do remember one thing I did do in RCT3, like something I changed. Because the thing is, if I take my own kind of history with the game in terms of working on it, I was working on some other stuff at Frontier when they started this. So the game started, I think it was like around the end of 2003 or the start of 2004. It was a pretty short kind of development cycle. But I came onto the project fairly late. So I was working on some other stuff, and then they needed some extra people to help out finish the game. So I came onto the project, I think it was around August 2004. And it was pretty exciting for me to work on the game because I'd been a fan of the first RCT. In fact, I think most of the people who worked on it hadn't really been like specifically like fans of the series. Like, most of them were just like, it was like, obviously, they were interested in working on it, but it was a job to them, and like, they weren't like people who previously played the games that much.
No, I played the theme park games. Really
Did you ever play like so you didn't play like the actual RCT games in your spare time before you worked for Frontier?
I might play them briefly, but it was mainly theme park games that I played. They're actually quite different. Although I think the first theme park game was better than when they went 3D. That
Yeah,
was
I
the
played the first
sim.
theme park. I think I had theme
Yeah,
park. I had theme park on the Atari Jaguar, which is a bit of a weird thing to have on. I'm just gonna get a. Where's the staff menu? I don't see anything for like. There must be on. Is that staff? Okay. Oh, that's guests. Hang on. Oh, there's staff. I should probably get another janitor because people are throwing up here. Yeah, I played like theme park back in the day, but the thing about Roller Coaster Tycoon was that it was kind of like when you have a game that like does the same thing that another game does, but just much better. It's like, because obviously people would have said, "Oh, it's just another theme park clone," but the thing is, it did it so much better. I'm not saying theme park was bad; it was fine, but obviously, Roller Coaster Tycoon had a very kind of specific, vibe and attention to detail and really nice look and so on.
they didn't. They didn't really have like the roller coaster sim part. They
Yeah,
had a roller coaster, but it was pretty basic.
could you actually like design it, or was it just pre-built? Because I don't have any memory of actually
I can't
making a roller
remember.
coaster in theme park.
I think there was some ability to put bits on the track, but it was not really simplified.
Mm. Yeah, I mean it's understandable because it's not an easy thing to implement. Like, I mean, because weren't you involved with some of the stuff to do with track pieces in RCT3?
Oh
Because like
yeah.
there were a lot
Well,
of those.
I wasn't directly involved, but I
Mm.
think I was given a task to work out how long it would take.
Yeah,
And
because
originally,
especially, sorry, go on.
I think we said something like 5 or 6 people for 1 year, and it
Yeah,
was more like 3 people in 8 months who
okay.
really cranked it out and
Mm.
might have done a bit of overtime to get it done,
Yeah,
basically.
I'll talk about overtime later on, but that's always an
Yeah.
element of the games industry. Yeah, I was going to say like so in the first two games, and I suppose I assume they added new roller coasters in the RC2 expansions because like the number of sprites needed, like you have to kind of have all these. I guess they're all rendered. They must all be rendered. I don't actually know how they made them, but they must. I assume they're rendered in 3D into 2D.
I
But the sheer number of
remember that
sprites, it's crazy.
when we did the expansions, we kind of got Chris's source code, but no instructions, and it was all
Mm.
in assembler,
Yeah.
but no instructions how to use it, and so
Mm.
that's why a lot of the time, a lot of the rides are fairly similar and
Yeah.
coasters, and it's just retheming because we
Mm.
couldn't really actually do a lot because we didn't
Yeah.
really understand some of how he'd set it up.
Yeah. But I mean, it is quite famous that yeah, RCT1 and 2 were written in assembly language, which for those who don't know is like it's kind of like a bit of a prehistoric way of doing things, and I guess it's because partly because that those games I assume were developed from the Transport Tycoon code base from the early 90s that Chris Sire wrote. So obviously it made sense for him to build it on top of the code he'd already done, but I feel like because when I saw Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 come out, I never actually bought it, but I saw a lot of people say it's very, very, very similar to the first game. Like it's not that much different. Maybe there were subtle differences that some people will pick up on, but it seemed like it wasn't that different. And I do wonder if part of that obviously was being made by one person, and that's like when you're getting towards the early 2000s, it's not that practical these days. Well, I guess back then for a big game to be made by one person. But also the fact that it was written in the same language probably means it was harder to actually change stuff than it would have been otherwise. So maybe that was a factor. So yeah, when we did RCT3, I'll say more about my coming onto it in a moment, but it was developed essentially from scratch in C++, but with access to the source code of the original game. And there were certain parts of the code that were essentially ported from assembly language into C. So I remember seeing like bits of code where there was like a comment saying like this is the original assembly language that this was converted from, to try and replicate many aspects of how the game worked. Obviously there were some things that were just written from scratch without any reference, but some stuff was just kind of brought directly across. I'm sure I remember seeing some stuff to do with the guest behavior. So this is one thing I worked on I worked on a variety of things, but one thing was like just making tweaks to how the guests behave and how they decide to do things and so on. And I did a lot more of that in the expansion packs, I think. One of the big changes was the introduction of groups. So if I go to here, you see this person is part of a group, and they kind of go around together. Because in the first 2 games, they were just purely like walking around on their own, and they weren't in groups. They just did their own thing. Whereas obviously here, the addition of the groups made it a lot more complex, and they have to kind of interact with each other. And I think I don't remember exactly how it works in terms of like how separate they can be. Like I'm pretty sure like you can have a thing where like one member of the group goes on the ride and another member doesn't, and the other member will wait for them. I think that's how it works, but I don't really remember that well.
Yeah, I think Oscar knew a bit about it as well.
Yeah, Oscar was he wasn't actually the lead programmer. Like I think John Roach was the lead programmer, but Oscar was a senior programmer on the game. I'm going to make a coaster just to remind myself how that works. I don't actually have any more guests at the moment, so maybe I do need to add more rides to actually get more people to come along. Let's try that one. At the moment, we don't have much unlocked. I remember it's Z to rotate this track. How do I need to click on that to actually proceed. So that's the chain lift. So you can't do the kind of steep upward slope with the chain lift apparently on this one. I mean, my approach was generally just to make the most ridiculous ride that, no one would want to go on because it's too dangerous. Just build it. If anyone watched my Planet Coaster video the other day, my Planet Coaster 2 video, I made a water flume that's like about 50 miles high and it just drops down and then it says it's dangerous. It's like, I guess you could say it's dangerous. I can't do a turn with the chain link either, or chain lift, whatever it's called. That'll do for that. I think
right now at the top, yeah. Well,
yeah. So then it turns off the chain or the chain lift when I go down.
Yep.
And then I guess banking is quite good to reduce the nausea. Although that's going to go into that. I'll try the other way. That's going to go into that ride. Is that the right banking? I think that's the one.
I'm feeling the up and down movement also will help.
So this is going up, but it's still banked. Oh, it can turn and go up because I wasn't quite sure. Because I remember like different coasters. There are some that have pieces that some don't. So for example, some you can't do like a turn and a upward or downward motion movement at the same time, whereas others you can, or there's different ways. So this one, it can do the banked upward curve.
Yeah.
I can even go like a tighter one. And then so banked gentle slope to straight track. So again, there was this team that were doing these rides. Is that the right height? That's low enough, I think. There was a team that was spending the whole time doing these different rides and these different track pieces, and that's a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
If I try that,
I think in some circumstances they're able to kind of just copy paste some bits over, but a lot of them they had to build them from scratch.
I wasn't really involved in that kind of stuff. I just speak to these guys in their room occasionally, but mainly they were just like they had their own special room. Were you in that room, or was that another room? Because we had this office in.
Yeah, I was in the room next door.
All right. Yeah, because we were in this office in Ely, north of Cambridge, and we were kind of separate from the rest of Frontier because when we both started at Frontier, it was at this kind of farmhouse in the middle of the countryside, and it was quite a nice location for an office, but the company became too big to fit in there. I'm getting bored of this coaster, so I'm just doing a very low effort coaster here. I'll do a little annoying, painful turn like that just for fun, just see what happens, see what they like about that. If they like that, they probably won't. We're in this farmhouse, and then they had to split into 2 offices because there wasn't enough space at the farmhouse. So
I think it was a legal requirement, wasn't it? We could only have 30 people there or something.
I feel like it was more people that were there, but maybe there was some restriction on how many people could go there. They were looking at doing like building building like a massive new building there, but that didn't go ahead in the end. I think the neighbours were complaining it was going to be too big. So
I don't even know what happened to that building after we left.
yeah, I'm not sure what happened. I don't know if someone just lives there now. I assume someone just lives there. But there was like this extension that was built that housed, for example, like the people doing the Wallace and Gromit games. They worked in the extension, so there was like a big, extra office attached to the main farmhouse.
Yeah, I was briefly in that extension. But originally, we were in a corridor, weren't we?
Yeah, I was working in a corridor for quite some time because it just got too cramped. There was just not enough space for all the developers, so it was very, very cramped. It was quite nice being able to go outside and there were horses in the fields nearby, and we played football in the fields. That was quite nice. So I'll do a path here, thingy rather, a queue.
And the kitchen was like a proper homely kitchen.
Yeah.
Not what you normally find in an office building.
Yeah. It had an Arga, which I don't even know if a lot of people know what Arga is. Do you remember the Arga?
I don't. I do remember it was like a nicely tiled kitchen though.
So the Arga is like, I'm not even sure what the idea behind it is. Like, I'm not very familiar with what it's all about, but it's some kind of special oven that people in farmhouses sometimes used to have, and it's like,
yeah, my parents have one. You can cook in it as well.
Is it meant to be like it's on all the time, which is really weird? Like, what is?
Yeah, so it's for heating, but then you can use the other half for cooking food.
Yeah, so it's like a combined heating system and oven. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
I feel like this coaster isn't going to get up this hill here. Oh, made it. So those tunnels actually weren't in the original game. They were added in. I think they were added in Wild expansion, or maybe Soaked. Because I don't want to quit. Yeah, there was a guy called Rick Griffith who was one of the programmers who came with me at the same time I started on the game, and that queue doesn't attach to the path. He did the tunnels, and I think that was in. It was either in Soaked or Wild, but I remember when he first did them, he was using a test texture on the side of the walls, and it was like this funny little picture of a shark that he'd drawn. And I looked up recently the cheat codes for the game, and there was meant to be a cheat code where you can enter the cheat code and it shows the shark texture on the walls, but it doesn't seem to work. So I'm not sure what happened to that, if that cheat code was removed from the game at a later date. It was a shame because I quite like that little funny picture of a shark. Okay, let's open this.
I remember one of the textures, I can't remember if it was this or something else, but there's like a little slug character as well, a missing texture. Yeah, the missing textures.
I don't remember that.
Oh, okay.
So games often did have like, when they're in development, you have like a special texture you use like when the game can't find the texture, and you want it to be something really obvious that the developer isn't going to miss, so they remember to actually fix the missing texture. So I assume that's what was used for that, but I don't remember that myself. I need to actually close this ride and open it again because I need to set the number of trains, because that's just a rubbish 3-car 1-train thing. That's better.
No, I think as time went on, we just went with like a bright purple colour or something, but rather boring.
Generally quite noticeable.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I did do in I think I did add this in RCT3, is that in RCT1 and 2, especially in RCT1, the guests would have their own kind of rating of like how much they thought a ride was value for money. So they'd like look at the price of the ride and decide whether to go on it. And what I'd always do in RCT1 is just like keep putting up the price by 10p, and then you reach a point where no one goes on the ride. Like suddenly everyone leaves the queue. It's like, oh, I need to take it down by 10p. Now I felt that wasn't a very good kind of interesting thing for gameplay. So what I did was I made it a bit more kind of, it was kind of less all or nothing. So different groups and different guests will have their own kind of sense of how much money they're willing to spend and how much, like essentially how rich they are. And I'm sure there was some kind of value about that. Like, are they a big spender or are they quite cheap or whatever? So I'll use that to feed into this, rating of their admission price. And that way that if you keep just putting up the ride by 10p, some people will leave the queue, but some won't, and obviously it's more interesting, kind of, for management and gameplay in terms of like it's not just all or nothing. So I felt that was an improvement, hopefully. This is a bit weird. Can you see the GUI here? It says total profit 13 ... It seems like that's just cut off. Like, I assume that's meant to say... What is it even meant to say? I can't actually tell if that's meant to say 13. I assume that's meant to say like 13 something, I guess. But it seems like the area... I mean, I'm sure this bug wasn't in the original game. I'm sure it did display this properly, as far as I know.
Yeah, it just looks like it's getting cut off.
Yeah. I mean, you always have these issues with text where, like, you do the game in English and then everything's fine, and then you translate the game to, like, German or Korean or something, and then suddenly the text doesn't fit in the boxes. And... it works if I click back onto it.
I remember having to do check the text on Thrillville when we did that for different languages for the subtitles, and then I kept having to adjust it for the new ones.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing with kind of translations, because you want your user interface to look good, but then like you don't want to leave like big gaps where they're not necessary, but then in certain languages they are necessary, because like, something that's we actually found, like, people think that like German is like the longest language, but we often found that Spanish, or at least sometimes found that Spanish had like longer words in some cases. So we'd have all these kind of bits of user interface like this, for example, and then you'd have to resize everything. I did do a thing which it wasn't really a great way of doing it, but at least made it readable, where it would actually shrink the text in some cases if the string was too long. Now, any kind of competent user interface designer would say, "Oh, no, that's terrible, that looks awful," but it did at least mean that you could read the text, which is something. So that's our park value, which I think... So we've done the first objective, 20,000.
We have more people in the park.
So the guests is going... Hang on. Guests has gone up. Intake. So I think when I built that coaster, people came in and then they stopped coming in when I stopped building stuff. So I need to build some more stuff, basically. I'll just build a few more things. I guess there should be like food.
Yeah, are they going home
food things
hungry? Although people are being sick again.
What I should do is I should use the UI that I think I made. If I go to guests... Now, I think this one was in the original game, but there was a screen on here. Now, there's actually a bug in this version of the game. This is the complete edition. There's meant to be icons at the top here somewhere you can click on. In fact, you see there. For some reason, this is broken in the complete edition, but this screen here I think wasn't there in the original version. In fact, especially this one. Maybe it was this one. There was some screen, like, we were doing the game and I was like, where's the screen that summarizes what the guests are doing? And like, people are like, what are you on about? I said in the first RCT there was a screen where you could like get a summary of all the things like guests were complaining about or whatever. So I added this myself. So this is summarizing what they're actually doing. So you can see there's lots of people queuing for this inverted coaster. I guess it doesn't really say like, because like there's the thoughts as well. Oh yeah, Janitor's quit. I need to maybe pay them more, but I know you can summarize thoughts. Oh, there we go. Okay, great. That's quite useful. Yeah, so I did this thing with like showing all these smiley faces and getting a real summary of what's going on. Are there people saying they're hungry? They're saying more rides, please. Someone's hungry. I guess they have not been here long enough to get hungry. So if I do a few stalls, do a burger stall, and it's got all this stuff. Like, I feel like some of this stuff here, like maybe was a bit, I wouldn't say wasted effort, but like it's a lot of extra effort to do all this extra stuff, which I'm not sure had that much impact on the game. Like, it's all like how much ketchup there's going to be, how many pickles there's going to be. It seems maybe a little bit overcomplicated for me, but I mean, maybe some people liked it.
I think we were trying to get some of the gameplay that's in Theme Park with that.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite nice in terms of it is more management, which is something we've said, like, people have said is lacking in Planet Coaster. I don't think they're going to improve on that in the future. But
Yeah.
I
don't
think
know how
sometimes
much,
actually. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I don't know how much it really affects things in this
Yeah,
though. It, a little bit more ice or whatever. Don't think
yeah,
it really has that much effect, if
yeah. Because I
any.
mean, like, I remember finding the files where these values were defined. Like when it says like lots of pickles, what does it actually do? Like, does it make them more thirsty or does it make them more full? And how much
Yeah.
value does that add to them? But like, it's probably a pretty minimal impact on the actual simulation.
Yeah.
So like, I'm not sure how much effort it was worth. I'm going to add another janitor because they seem to have vomit everywhere. Higher. Things like you have them watering. I don't think if guests even care about stuff being watered.
Can you override that? I thought there's options to
You
like
can,
filter
yeah,
out.
you can customize like the patrol area. I remember I definitely used to do this. Like these days I'm too lazy to do that kind of thing. I just dump down tons of janitors and hope that they get on with it. What are these? Oh, you can change their clothing color. Happiness. That person's slightly less happy. If I expand them, so I assume that's their monthly wage.
Yeah.
I think laziness. Is that just predetermined? I don't know if that actually changes. Maybe it's just predetermined, and that's like.
I think so.
Yeah, because like I think that was the idea that you hire people. Then there are certain janitors you care more or less about like staying employed, so you might pay the lazier ones less. I think we nearly reached 400. So yeah, what one memory I have of this, I don't know if it was this mission or a later one, we had this bug that we came across early on where I don't remember if it was just as the game launched or before it launched, but we were having this issue where people weren't going on the rides very much. Like you'd have like loads of people in your park and only a few of them would be going on rides. And the reason for that, we realised later on, we fixed this later on and made various changes in future versions, was so the code was brought across from RCT in terms of how guests choose which rides to go on. And there's two main ways. So one way is they just kind of decide, like they'll just think and they'll stop and think and say, okay, I've decided I'm going to go on, merry-go-round 1, for example. Then they'll go to that ride and then go on it. So that's one way they decide. But another way, and it turns out this is quite an important way, is they'll just be walking along and just walk past the entrance of a ride and then decide to go on that ride. So, for example, you see here, we've got the merry-go-round entrance. So these people, as they walk past the entrance, might spontaneously decide to go on it. Now, the reason we had this issue with people going on rides, or rather not going on rides, was because... what I'm actually going to do, I'm just going to save this mission and go back to the career screen. I want to see if the second mission is the one I'm thinking of. Because there is a particular park... No, that's not it. Okay, I'll carry on with this one for now. Does that resume? Yeah. So maybe the park was changed, but there was this design of the first park where there were these multi-width kind of paths. So you'd have something like... you see down here... If you take this middle tile here, there's like 3 tiles across. Let's say they're just walking across that middle tile. They're not going to be walking past a ride entrance because the ride entrance would be adjacent, let's say, for example, to this tile or this tile. So you'd have all these people kind of wandering around and just walking past the ride entrances without walking directly past them. So that was quite a big problem. So later on we made some improvements to how people actually decide to go on rides. I think what we did is... kind of put more priority on them deciding to go on rides, like just like choosing a ride from the park to go on rather than just having to walk past a ride. So that was one of the issues we had. Because actually I did ask some questions on Reddit a while ago about like questions for developers, and that was one of them. Someone said, were there any kind of oh shit moments when the game launched or early on? And that was one of them. Like people, I think it was after the game launch, people saying, why isn't anyone going on the ride? And that was part of the reason. I think also if you have a lot of paths that don't necessarily go anywhere, or you don't have rides there, again people will just walk down them, and while they're doing that, if there's no rides for them to go on that connect directly to that path, then just not going to go on so many rides. So yeah, that was one of the problems we had. Another problem we had early on, I guess it's not quite the same kind of thing, but so we were working with Atari on this game. So Atari was the publisher. They just recently renamed themselves from Infogrames because this company bought out the Atari name, and they brought forward the release of the game. I think it was either by 1 week or 2 weeks. I think it was 2 weeks. Do you remember
that? To be honest, I don't. But I just remember we were all short on time. We were short on time anyway.
I mean, it's the norm in the games industry, but I mean, I do remember. I mentioned that I came onto the project fairly late, and my first impression was, wow, there's still a lot to be done. And at that point, people were still doing a fairly normal 9 to 5, and I was staying back a lot of kind of late evenings, at least like 1 or 2 hours sometimes, and then longer later on, because I felt like the game needs it. And then later on, people did start staying back later, and we call that crunch in the industry. It's pretty bad for you, and it was pretty bad for me. I had like kind of health problems as a result of crunch over many years. So we had this issue where there's lots to be done. There's always too much to be done. And when the game launched, I believe there were about 1,000 bugs in the kind of bug database, some of which hadn't even been looked at because we hadn't had time to look at them. And it wasn't helped by the fact that Atari brought forward the release of the game by 2 weeks, which is not really what you want to have happen when you're trying to fix the problems. So that didn't help. I think they weren't doing that well financially at that point. I think they were kind of relying on the game to, save the company. So it was, I think, their kind of biggest franchise. But yeah, it wasn't an ideal situation for them to kind of just take time away from us rather than give us some more time. But it's often the way.
Yeah. I remember you doing a really late one time.
Yeah. What was the latest you stayed?
Probably not that late. Probably 9, 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
But I did it quite often. That was a thing.
Yeah.
I remember a lot of the time what would happen is I'd be uploading the build. So everybody would go home and I'd be just there on FTP, and you know how slow that was.
Yeah, just waiting for it to upload so you can go home.
Yeah, and then if it failed for some reason, I'd have to start it again, and it took like hours to do.
Yeah, I think I had to do that quite a lot sometimes as well.
Yeah.
So
just drove me nuts.
It was quite frustrating because, sometimes I'd be just waiting around for a build to finish so I could confirm it worked and then go home. But I asked for remote access. I think, can I just log into my machine from home and check that the build completed and that kind of thing. But for security reasons back then that wasn't allowed. So there was a lot of kind of having to be in the office just to wait for things to happen. Because compiling the game, compiling is the process by which the code gets turned into something you can run. And I don't know how long it took from scratch. It could have been half an hour. It definitely could be quite long for some of these older games on the older. Even though the games were smaller back then, obviously the actual computers were slower as well. So definitely some of the games I worked on, you'd be waiting an hour or even 2 hours sometimes for it to actually build. In some cases,
One was so bad for me when I was living in the bottom Beeley, because I was near the office.
Yeah.
But I used to be right at the top of the hill. I didn't have a car, so
Oh yeah.
not that it's a big place, but it was 20, 30 minutes to walk up a hill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can just pop into the office and pop back again.
No.
Because I lived about 20 minutes drive from Ely, but yeah. But I mean, I do remember. They say that crunch is at least at Frontier, they say it's not as bad as it used to be in some respects, but they at least got food in later on, for later projects, they'd get a pizza or something. Because when I used to work late at Frontier on RCT3, I'd be there in the evening. There was no no canteen or anything. There was no facilities in terms of food. I'd go to the kitchen and find maybe if I was I'd find one chocolate digestive in the cupboard. So I'd be kind of hungry as well, which is wasn't that fun. So we seem to have nearly reached 400 guests. I'll add one more flat ride maybe.
I mean, there was Tesco. That's where we used to.
I guess it wasn't that far away, but
Well, Dean often got like a whole rotisserie chicken from there and stuff like
oh
this.
yeah,
And we're like,
yeah.
what?
I wasn't really in the habit of going there. I could have been, I guess, but I didn't really bother.
Yeah.
I guess what I could do actually, let's build a swimming pool because we had swimming pools in RCT3 Soaked, which is the first expansion pack. So let's just add one and just kind of let that kind of push us up to 400 guests. And remind ourselves how this worked.
Remember going to that Tesco once when I actually got a copy of the game, a boxed copy. And I didn't realise this, but they put the magnetic labels, you know, the ones that set the security alert us off, in them before they actually give into the shops for whatever reason. I thought the shops put them in, usually.
You mean inside the box? Or
Yeah. So it set off the alarm. And then I had to explain to the security, one, they didn't sell the game there anyway, and two, it was a US copy.
Oh, yeah. I've just noticed actually I've run out of money. I've not been paying attention to the cash, and I've totally run out of money. Maybe because this ride is broken, but I guess this one's... I should raise the price on this one because this one seems popular. Because that's only £1. But I need to watch the queue. I actually did this on Planet Coaster 2 the other day. I changed the price of a ride, and then what I didn't like was people just disappeared from the queue. Like, I want to see people actually walk to the entrance and then suddenly decide, oh, I don't want to do this because it's too expensive. I've done it.
And your merry-go-round got fixed.
Oh, yeah. So it does look like the simulation aspect in this game. I guess maybe it's because the coaster defaults to £1. So maybe... at least forces you to think about what price it should be. I don't know if the other games like Planet Coaster actually choose a price based on the ride, in which case, like, okay, in one sense that's more convenient for the player, but in another sense, like, are you taking some agency away from the player and deciding what they want to price the ride? So I don't currently have enough money to actually... I could sell some of these pool pieces. I just want to try doing the pool thing for a bit. Though you don't get much money back from deleting those.
You want to probably sack some of the cleaners because you have a load of them.
I should look at the finance screen. So I'm probably just... I assume they were cheap, but maybe I was wrong to assume that. So where is that the finances? That's value. I'm sure there's a finances. That's it. Okay. So ride construction. So the staff wage is only 142, so that's not very much in the grand scheme of things. But I guess it could be running on a knife edge in terms of the finances. I'm only making about 500, 600 per month at the moment. I guess this might go up now that I've raised the price of that ride.
Yeah, you can probably raise the price on the other coaster as well, because it seemed that there was a lot of people in that queue, even though it was a small queue.
So that's 250. So actually, what are the ratings on this? I need to look at the ratings. 2.78, which isn't great. And that's that one. Is that the wrong one? Oh, no, that's 5.7. So high excitement intensity and quite high nausea as well. But I guess that means I should be able to charge a bit more for it. Which is... Is that it? Okay.
Well, the other one was 250, wasn't it? So at least
I'll try 3 for that one. So I've got enough money to open this pool now. How do I do... So that's the entrance. Do these actually have queues? I think you do queues for these.
Yeah, I think they've got weird tiny queues, though.
Can you not use normal queues on them? I'll try normal queue. If I can remember.
I think it automatically does it, but...
Oh, he doesn't like that. You see, that's not connected. Okay, so I think it's just normal path. Assume that's okay. So what do I need? Do I need other stuff for this pool?
I swear it had its own path type, but never mind. Let's see if they go in it.
So do I need like lifeguards or anything? There's extras. Oh, there's lifeguards.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to do this in Planet Coaster 2 and having difficulty like remembering where the lifeguards option was.
Oh no, they are going in.
So pool extras. How is that? Wait, oh, there's pool extras. So lifeguards. There was quite a funny bug with diving boards in the original. In fact, if I do... So high diving boards. I'm sure there's a way of raising this up. Is it like shift or something? Oh, there we go. Oh, you can do this.
I mean, that doesn't make any sense for a start.
Oh, not enough funds. I'll do as many as I can. If I wait a few seconds, I can afford that. Okay, there we go. There was quite a funny bug with these early on during development where... in fact, if I try... I don't know if it was just that the actual diving board base was a bit further back. So people would jump off the edge of the diving board, but it wouldn't quite clear the kind of ground around the swimming pool. So they just land on their ass and go ow or something, which was quite funny. It was pretty hilarious when we first saw that, but we fixed that. So see they're choosing which height to go off. Can they actually simultaneously, can they actually hit each other? It is quite fun just watching them jump off.
I would have thought we would have made it so they can't.
I mean, that would take effort though. So I don't know who did this, but I mean, the thing is, it's funnier in games when things like that go wrong. Like if two people collide midair, that's quite funny. Although obviously it depends on whether the game's actually got any animation or whatever to deal with that, which it probably didn't. So I assume that it just relied on them not doing it by luck. So we can do flumes as well, but I don't really have enough money to. I guess I can get a loan. That's the thing in this game, isn't it?
Yeah.
So buy land, buy easement rights, marketing campaigns. Is there a loan? There's definitely a loan in RCT1. I feel there is a loan in this. Maybe it's under finances. Oh, loan. There's the loan. So we do already have a loan, so I can extend the loan.
A risky move.
I don't care about the future. I just get 20,000. By the way, this finance view. So when I came onto the game, there was this rule in place that all user interface had to be no more than 280 pixels wide, which just didn't really work very well because some stuff needed to be a lot bigger than 280 pixels. Like this, for example, there was some kind of weird thing where to try and make it work, it just showed a few columns. You had to mouse over something to see the actual headings of the columns because there wasn't enough space to fit them in. So I think I was one of the people who said, it's not really working like this, is it? We need to change that. Yes, how do you do flumes? There. Pull slides. Oh, I don't have any flumes. Do these need to be researched?
Possibly. It might be that, as this is not part.
I guess they start as not researched.
Yeah.
But if I go like this, just whack up the budget of research and put everything else down, and see if we actually get any. I mean, maybe I don't know if there's any locking or anything that means you won't get it, but we'll try that. It's a pretty crowded pool, but I guess it's working. I'm just gonna have a look at some of the questions people asked about the game on Reddit. Someone says, I don't necessarily know the answer to this. Someone says, were there any features planned for RCT3 in development that didn't make it to the final release that you think would have made the game better? Was the fireworks editor actually in the game?
I think it's like a cheat.
Because we definitely did this fireworks editor, and it worked. I'm pretty sure it works, but is it actually in the game? Someone said, yeah, it's a cheat. I remember seeing someone saying it's a cheat, but
yeah,
I'm sure that was part of the original game. I remember that being cut, but
I think.
Or do you have to make something from it to actually?
Doesn't it just rename a guest?
Oh, there's fireworks. I'll Mixmaster. Hang on, it is in the game, or is it just predefined displays? So how does this work? So add. So I need to make bases. So this is where the fireworks are launched from. Because it's quite a sophisticated system, actually. If I go load, let's just load a predefined display. Oh, I see, you just go like that. Okay, so I place that there. I guess at the moment this isn't going to be very good because this park, they've like turned off night on this park. Like it goes straight from like evening to morning. So it's not ideal for seeing the fireworks play. But he's got, yeah, this does seem to actually be in the game. Maybe I assume you can actually make your own custom one. Yeah, you can. Yeah, maybe it's just so well hidden away. Like, how many people even use this? It's quite a cool feature. So how do I actually test this? Can I actually just make it? If I just make it happen at wait, can I only edit this 1 minute at a time?
Unless this was something that was put in for one of the expansions. I really can't remember now.
I thought it was part of the original.
Yeah, I have a feeling that we just didn't release it at first or something. Like it was a cheat originally or debug or something, and then we put it in later on.
Obviously, this looks better at night. Now, is that just restarted?
Yeah, it looks like it. And that'll be another timeline again.
Oh, it doesn't like it if I move the scroll bar past where it's showing on this kind of progress thing. Okay, well I'll leave that going. Hang on, wait, it stops when I close it, apparently. Okay, never mind. I guess it's because I guess it started playing on its schedule at first, and then when I clicked, I think maybe clicked on play or something in the actual editor, and it started playing outside of the schedule, just on the editor thing. So it closed when I closed the editor. So I think it was in the game. Yeah, I can't think of anything in particular that was cut. I mean, like, I guess the game had quite a clear vision in terms of what we wanted to do for the first game, you know, the original base game, and we did it. It's just it didn't all necessarily work perfectly to begin with.
Yeah, I think what we were trying to achieve then, especially with the time that we had, was to accurately recreate what Roller Coaster Tycoon was, but in 3D.
Yeah.
And not bother about adding new features.
Yeah, I mean, one thing at a time, that makes sense.
Yeah. Because wasn't quite what we wanted. Then maybe they wanted more.
Yeah, I mean, like, I remember, you know, people do say, obviously, RCT1 and RCT2 have a very distinctive look and a kind of style and vibe and so on, and that they do, you know, that it's kind of like a timeless graphical style, and it's always hard for a 3D game to replicate that, especially the kind of relatively early 3D games, and when you've got like quite a, you know, you're limited in terms of polygon count and effects, and you know, we don't really have shaders in the same way that we do now. If you zoom in on these, I mean, these models are actually quite impressive. That they get a lot of personality out of very low numbers of polygons. But that's obviously one reason why there's, you know, a bigger limit on the number of guests you can have in the park compared to some of the earlier games, because it's just putting too much demand on the graphics. And I think people did say at the time, you know, the game wouldn't run well on all systems, but that's kind of inevitable when you can just build as much stuff as you want. I remember when, so go on.
I was going to say, I think we did try to make it look like as close as we could, given that it wasn't true 3D.
Yeah.
One of the limitations, as close as possible to how the original games looked. But I mean, from the character's point of view, the ones in Roller Coaster Tycoon, the originals, kind of we're weird sausage-faced men. So we had to do something different for the actual peeps. So I don't think it was a bad job. It's just maybe not what people were expecting.
So I was just looking at the camera options because I remember like we had issues with like deciding. I'm going to delete this because it's making too much noise. can I just...
Yeah, I remember that we had about 10 different camera types.
Yeah. Where's the...
And I don't think all of them are available in the configs.
Yeah, so we had... So I've changed the camera to advanced mode. And this is actually what most of us used. I think, at least I think I normally use this one when actually working on the game. Because the default mode is... It's like a fixed angle. You can change it, but then it reverts to that angle. Whereas this one, you can kind of... I feel you have more control over the camera, but it was definitely harder to use, so we had to work out like which one to actually make the default. And I feel like it's not ideal. There's 4 different camera modes. Obviously, you don't have to use them though, but like trying to explain to people how to use the camera, then it's like, oh, here's how to use a different camera. It's quite hard. But this one does at least let you, keep the angle at a certain angle without it just reversing. I'm gonna have a look at the other questions from Reddit. Someone says here, like, this isn't something I know much about. I wasn't really involved in this aspect of the game. Why the obsession with weird coaster concepts and elements, such as the Arrow pipeline, the Hershey turbulence, and the Schwarzkopf figure 8? That weird splitting coaster in Wild. I love the effort dedicated to rare bits of coaster history, but how did you guys possibly find the time and resources to add it all? Well, I wasn't involved whatsoever with any of the actual decisions of which coasters to have, and I don't really know much about coasters. I don't know if you know anything about that aspect of it.
I know for the Hersheys one, we had some sort of deal with Hersheys
Yeah.
at one point, so that's why that was in there.
Yeah. Well, I noticed there was a Hershey's like chocolate stall or something on here. Or something
Yeah.
like Hershey's stall sponsors.
Because I remember we got sent Hersheys, and to be honest, nobody really liked the Hersheys.
No, we don't like Hershey's in Britain. It tasted kind of weird.
Yeah, it's a weird tasting chocolate that tastes like it's off.
I mean, I'd never heard of Hershey's before this game because, again, we don't really have Hershey's in Britain.
Yeah.
I do remember we had some testers who were kind of sent across from Atari in America, and they would like test the game all night, and then they'd go home in the morning and they'd like leave us a list of bugs that they found. And I was having a conversation with them. We were talking about like so there's what we call in the UK candy floss and what they call in America cotton candy, and we're having a debate about like which of these terms make more sense, and they made the valid point that like what you floss with your teeth with it, do you? So we do have. I remember actually in Roller Coaster Tycoon 1 and 2, I think also they had separate kind of localization files for both British English and American English, but that we didn't do that in RCT3. It's all just American English. So for example, in RCT1, the janitors are called handymen, at least in the UK version, whereas here they're just called janitors, which again is a term that's kind of less used here. So I think I have some flumes now I can build.
Yeah, just going back to the other roller coasters, the extra ones, I think that there were some people that were just really invested in doing research on different coasters. I remember that during the process I would go through and James, people like that, James Taylor, he was the designed most of the parks, and we would go through and pick out really interesting coasters that we wanted to try and make.
Yeah.
So that was the reason really that we did get invested in it.
Yeah, I mean obviously there were people who I guess probably more into theme parks and so on than me. Like I wasn't really that into them. But I remember actually we had this guy John Wardley come to the office. He was like a professional roller coaster designer. So he came and gave a talk. I don't really remember much about it, but
you did Nemesis, right?
I think so, yeah. So Nemesis at Alton Towers, was it? I've not been on a roller coaster in probably about 15 years now, but I guess some people like them. If I do, again, I'm not making much effort in this flume. I'm going to do the autocomplete. There we go. That'll do. Well, that
I do remember that a lot of the people that played the Roller Coaster Tycoon, they were coaster experts and
Yeah.
knew quite a lot about them.
Mm.
So I think that was part of it as well. We wanted to try to mesh up with what the players wanted.
Yeah.
We
I
did
think.
actually
Yeah.
spy on the forums and things, try to work out what they wanted,
Yeah.
even though they probably didn't believe it at the time.
Mm. I'm surprised that actually got up that slope. I guess it had enough momentum to do it, so that does work. Talking of like things like forums and so on, and like fans and so on. I remember we got an email from a Roller Coaster Tycoon fan before the game was released, and I'm trying to remember if actually I don't know if I have the text anywhere. Like I'm just going to check on my phone if I got it in my notes. I've got it somewhere, but it said something like, "Hey guys, Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 had better not suck," and then he said something like, "I want to be able to crash the rides into each other," and he says something like, "I bet you won't even let it do this," which is total arse-tastic. Like he was basically anticipating that we weren't going to let the rides crash into each other. And it was complaining about that preemptively. It was quite a funny email. I guess we did let the rides crash, but do you remember the whole thing? In fact, if I break the ride here, it won't actually let me edit it while it's doing, does it? You have this whole kind of people going flying thing, which didn't really happen in the first game. That was quite fun. In fact, if I go, what was the cheat?
Yeah.
Was it James? Was it Jay Hunt? Or was it James Hunt?
Yeah, James.
There we go.
Yeah. Nice, the buggy.
Yeah.
Fun fact, it's actually me driving.
Yeah.
I used my likeness as the driver.
So that was done to like test. I guess it was done partly to test the physics of the people like flying around.
Yay! Yeah, they love being hit.
Yeah, we had to say
really
yay. That's quite a change from the first game as well. But I guess I should move this out of the path because it's just going to be getting in the way.
You can't really tell them, but they seem to enjoy pain, which is a bit odd.
Yeah. Let me have a look at some more of these questions. Someone asked, what did you think about the RCT games that came after RCT3? I mean, I guess that's just Planet... No, not... I mean, RCT World, I guess. I just never played any of those. I just saw the bad reviews. It's like, that's a shame. That, because I think there was a lot of... Did Atari and Frontier essentially fall out? There was some kind of problem. I think Frontier didn't want to stick with Atari.
I think there was something about payment royalties.
Yeah.
And also, there was some argument with Chris Sawyer and Atari that I don't think we were directly involved in, but basically that slowed things down a lot.
Yeah. I do remember a lot of litigation about various things while working at Frontier. But I guess that happens sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I didn't really pay much attention to the other games that came out in the series. It's just like, I saw the reviews. It's like, oh, okay, that's not going so well. Obviously, Frontier did Planet Coaster. Again, I played Planet Coaster 2 the other day. It seemed fine. It's not really the kind of thing I normally play these days. But I was speaking to someone, because I did recently the reunion for people who worked on RCT3. And I was speaking to one of the people who was working on Planet Coaster 2 as well. There were a few people there who were working on that game. And one guy was saying, like... I think it was something about the kind of effects for flumes and stuff like that, like the visuals. And he was saying, like, it's actually a lot harder in certain cases to kind of make it look good these days, as things, in terms of the way things look good back then. And we were talking about the analogy of, for example, so Frontier is also known for the Elite games, and the first Elite game was like a space game where the planets were literally just circles, essentially. And then in later games, the planets became more sophisticated in terms of the graphics. But obviously what's acceptable at one point is kind of not acceptable at a later date. And also in some cases, I think you were saying something like it's harder in some cases to actually get it looking as good now as it did then, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. But certain things make it a lot more complicated than you would think to make things look good. So I'm not really familiar with that kind of stuff. I was never really involved with graphics programming. That's not my area. And
It's probably more about the expectation of where things are now.
Yeah, like so if we look at the Elite games, Frontier Elite 2, which is the second Elite game, had Earth as a planet you could visit, and then the third game in the series, which was called Frontier First Encounters, it still had Earth, but suddenly Earth was like a kind of it was like a kind of polluted brown mess. You couldn't really make any actual land masses, and that's because it had a new planet generation system that couldn't actually kind of reproduce the actual continents of Earth to the required level of detail. So it was kind of like a step backwards in some respects, but there were technical reasons for that. So that kind of thing just sometimes happens. There's someone here saying, how did the devs approach balancing the graphics quality of the game assets with ensuring the game could run on most PCs available at the time? Now, again, I wasn't really involved with writing graphics code, but I do remember we had a problem, which was, if I go to the settings, graphic settings, you see here it's like high quality, there's various performance settings, and we've got auto detect. I think the original release of the game didn't have this. It was like customs. It was just essentially these custom settings, but people would go through and just tick everything, and then there were all these sliders. Like, I think a lot of these were just sliders, or there were more sliders than there are now, and they put all the sliders to max. The trouble is, putting the sliders to max, they hadn't really been like necessarily balanced as such. Like, we were spending most of the time working on the actual gameplay rather than the options menu and the sliders. So they put like level of detail. In fact, was it this one actually? Oh, there we go. Yeah, it was stuff like this. They put everything to maximum, and it would kind of really hurt the performance of the game. But the actual improvement in graphical quality was either very low or non-existent. So people were saying, like, why is the game running so slow? And part of the reason was I guess it was a mixture of these settings being too hard to kind of mess up, or rather too easy to mess up, but also that the game, again, I don't think we really had this auto detect in the original version, or at least not to the same. I think we definitely worked on that later on, especially for the expansion packs, to improve that. So we actually tried to get a decent default setting for each different machine. And the other thing is, because you have so many different PCs and graphics cards and so on, and some of them would have like weird issues, and you can't necessarily anticipate all that. So it definitely did cause some problems for us. And it's the kind of thing where you don't really think much about the options menu, but if you choose the options or choose the values for the sliders in a way that doesn't necessarily make sense, then it can cause further problems. And we as developers would normally run the game, I guess, like I assume when you ran the game, you probably would have normally run in release mode. Do you remember about that? Because when we develop games, we can run the game with either what's called debug mode or release mode. So I assume if you were doing kind of stuff, you probably would have mainly run in release mode. But as developers, at least for me as a programmer, I would have mostly worked in debug mode, because it will catch certain errors and so on, and help you kind of track down certain errors. But the frame rate would be like 10 or 20 or something at most, so it had pretty bad performance. It took a long time to load as well, especially in debug mode. So there was a lot of waiting around.
No, I don't think we used the debug mode that much.
No.
I mean, a lot of my stuff was like setting up the rides and the properties on the rides and the stalls and every item.
Yeah. So we had a tool called Build Tool that was like, it kind of compiled the game assets, so I assume that's the one you would have mostly been using.
Yeah.
Make changes.
So a lot of the time, I would have problems with the artists where they would put a non-square texture onto something, and then I have to run at them and tell them off.
Yeah.
Because it would break the build.
Oh yeah, so you mean like texture that didn't have the same width and height is what you're saying there?
Yeah, non-square ones.
Yeah. So would those just not work in the game?
Yeah, and sometimes it would be really annoying, like it'd be one pixel off, and I didn't understand why it was one pixel off, but then I would break it, and I'd open it, look at it, it would look square, and then I'd like check the size, and it would be like one pixel off. I don't know why. It's just like they were trying to annoy me.
Yeah. So there's one question here. It says, "Thanks for building such an impactful experience. What was the leadership team like? Were they hated / loved?" So I mean, I don't know if you have any particular opinions of that. I can give my own take on that. But did you have a particular, did you get on with the bosses, or did you not really deal with them that much? I guess it also depends how you define leadership team as well.
Yeah, well, it was really the most uh, amount of the leadership team that we sort of had, or was often in that part of the studio, was Johnny and David Walsh.
Yeah. So Johnny was the producer of the game. So Johnny Watts is now the CEO of Frontier, but at the time he was essentially heading up one of the two teams in the company that were actually making games. So he was like, in charge of the day-to-day management of the game, and like, making sure stuff's getting done and people are working on the right things and so on. And also, we didn't actually have an actual designer at the time. Like for RCT3 Soaked, we actually brought in our first full-time game designer. Before that wasn't actually like an actual position in the company. So Johnny was also involved in deciding like, certain aspects of game design, and some things were just done like, let's say I'm implementing some kind of feature about how guests behave. I'll make my own judgment call about how certain aspects of that should work. Obviously, certain things I might discuss with other people or the management and say like, how do you think this should work? But some things, they're just fairly small things. You would decide yourself. I would decide that like, I think it should work like this or something like
that. So, well, myself and James were classed as designers, but it was more like level and
level designers.
And I don't know what my role would have been really. Sort of tech, but not tech design, but not really, because it was more like setting up systems, maybe.
Yeah.
Is that what we could call it? So just setting up properties and things like that. We didn't have an actual designer that was like a creative vision holder or anything like that.
Yeah.
That was Johnny's role.
So I always got on well with Johnny. So, I worked quite well with him. Obviously, we had David Walsh, who was the managing director of the company. He was also at the ED office. I tended to get on well with him. We had David Braben, who was back at the farmhouse, so he was the boss of Frontier. Again, I always got on well with him in general, but I would say there were times on some projects where like I felt like maybe there were certain things he could have dealt with better. But I guess it kind of also, because I worked at Frontier for 13 years, and there were definitely some projects where it was felt like, because one game I worked on was Lost Winds 2. So Lost Winds was a game for the Wii. Lost Winds 2 was the sequel to that. I worked on that, and that was basically like a small team working outside of the influence of the management, essentially doing our own thing and being trusted to do our own thing. And I think it turned out pretty well. I think there were definitely times when people weren't so satisfied with the management and their decisions. I'm just trying to create an enclosure here just to try that out. I've created a wooden fence. I'm going to create an elephant here anyway, even though that's meant to need an electric fence, just to see what happens. So this was added in the Wild expansion pack. I must say, actually, working on the expansion packs was one of my favourite things, because I guess partly because when you're doing a whole game from scratch, it's that's a separate enclosure. Can I join onto this enclosure? Or does that just give me a new enclosure? Okay, it needs to be the same fence type. Working on an expansion pack means like not having to rewrite the whole thing from the beginning. You can just improve stuff you've already done and make do the fixes you want to do all along. So I quite like that. So how do I do an entrance to this? So that's the animal house.
I think for me though, with the expansions, it wasn't that simple, because a lot of what I did was set up these various things like configuring the animals or configuring new items. So it was almost as much work for me to do what I was.
I guess for me as a programmer, it was
with less time.
Yeah. So for me as a programmer, I guess it was slightly less stressful than for some people because it depends what your role was.
Yeah.
I assume, can I just attach a path to this? Do people go on it if I just do a path to it?
But I also remember having like us reporting issues and bugs with certain programmers and them just playing ping pong with it and things like that, which wasn't so helpful.
I do remember as a programmer on one of the projects learning the term, what is it? Non-trivial. Like if a designer came up to me and said, "Oh, can we do this?" I'd say non-trivial, just as a way of kind of excuse not to do it. Like in retrospect, it's like, okay, you shouldn't just say no to everything just because you can't do it in like 5 minutes. But obviously, sometimes they're just asking, "Oh, can this thing be done quickly, or will it take like days or something?" So obviously, I guess in that sense, I've got like a elephant cam here. This does remind me of something actually, something I did on RCT3 Wild. So this elephant's called Everett the elephant, and the way this naming system works. So I did this where the animals will be named based on the human names. So there's a file with a load of like human names, like for the guests, and like see Brad B, for example. So for the animals, it's like, okay, we need names for the animals. So I did the system for this where it would just choose a random name from the names that start with that letter. So Edward the elephant or whatever. But also the system had to deal with the fact that what if you build what if you buy 500 elephants? We don't want any to have the same name as another elephant, so we have to check that another elephant doesn't have the same name. But then what if the elephant like breeds or whatever? Like you'd have like Edward the elephant Jr. or Edward the elephant the second. So it would keep track of these kind of family relationships. So I was quite pleased with how that worked out. That was one of the more fun things to work on, doing the animal naming system. In terms of other stuff I did on the game, I did some stuff. I mentioned I think I did some stuff with the guest behavior. I did stuff with the GUI, like the interfaces, like some of these windows and fixing some problems with them. I think I did a bit of everything. Like I would often just like look at the bug list and just fix stuff on a whim. I kind of became known as the Maverick amongst certain people. I think generally in a good way, but I was kind of trusted just because the thing is I had kind of weird entry into the industry. Like I didn't have a degree in computer science. I dropped out of university for personal reasons. Seems like not many people are going on this coast now. Maybe I should take the price down a bit. So I didn't have like the same kind of expertise in programming that some of the other programmers had. So it was sometimes a bit harder for me to find stuff to do that was within my kind of skill level. Whereas there was quite a lot of stuff I could do, but there was a lot of stuff that I didn't know in terms of how to actually do things properly. So often what I would do is just like look for stuff that I could achieve and achieve it, basically. Later on in later projects, it became a lot more kind of formal and less of that stuff in terms of like just doing random crap, just had to be more planned. But I did definitely learn a lot in terms of improving my skills there.
I think that's what I found as well. I started during the expansion packs, but I learned a lot more. Especially, I went to university, but I learned a lot more in that first 2 years being on those expansion packs and Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 than I learned at university in 3 or 4 years of being there.
Was it a game design course you did or something like that?
No, it was similar.
Okay.
They didn't really have like a straight game design course. It was a bit of a mixture of film and TV as well.
I see.
But even then, they didn't really go through how these things were built and put together. It was more like, oh, here's a simple task that you might have to do.
Well, I think I hear a lot about these kind of courses where they don't really necessarily teach you that much that's useful. Then when you actually start in the actual industry, because I think other thing is like each company will have their own ways of doing things. So like you start at Frontier, it's like, okay, you have to use this weird tool that no other company uses that we've made ourselves, and it's really weird in how you use it, and no one understands it, but you'll pick it up eventually. And then some other company will have their own thing that's like that but different. I've just noticed the animal keeper falling in the pile of dung there. I'm pretty sure that was deliberately implemented. I don't remember exactly, but yeah. So I would find stuff to work on and just kind of do it essentially. So I definitely don't remember everything I did on this because there was just too many different things. But definitely a lot of it was to do with the people behavior, guest behavior and rides and stuff like that. I'm seeing if there's any more questions on this Reddit thing. So there's.
Well, I do remember one of the better lecturers there. What the reason was that he worked at Iguana. So he came from a games industry background.
Oh yeah.
So he knew what he was talking about, whereas I'd say like 99% of the rest of the lecturers didn't have a clue.
Yeah, because I mean, maybe some of these people haven't even worked on games before.
Yeah. So it was, well, why are you here teaching us when you don't actually know what you're doing?
Well, it's like with because little plug for myself here. I tutor computer science as a private tutor. So when they introduced computer science as a subject in the UK, there was a lack of actual teachers who knew like anything about computer science. Like they had ICT, which was just like basically doing basic computer stuff like Word and so on. But computer science is actually quite hard. I mean, it's quite a hard course, and in fact, even for me as being someone who's worked in programming for years, and there was still stuff I didn't know. I guess partly because I didn't finish my university course, but I had to like learn quite a bit of stuff, and some of it's quite hard. So yeah, I guess it's hard to find people who are willing to work in that job and actually know what they're talking about and have, especially with programming, because I think programming is like not, some people find it very hard to pick up. So someone who's not really done it before, having to teach it and be able to give feedback on programs is not very easy. One thing I just remembered, by the way, is I was saying before about like forums and fans and so on. And one thing I did do on the game later on with I don't remember if it was for Soaked or Wild, but we'd load the game every day, like multiple times a day, and we'd hear the same music on the main menu every time. And eventually I got sick of it, like just hearing the same music over and over again. So I changed the code on the main menu to play different music each time, like go through each music track in the game. Because there were lots of tracks that, you could attach them to a ride, but often you wouldn't ever hear them unless you actually bothered to do that. So I just made it play all these different tracks. But what I did was I made it check the date on the computer. So if the date was Halloween, then it would play the spooky ride music. And one of the best things was going on the forums like the day after Halloween, and there was someone saying like, I loaded the game yesterday on Halloween and it played the spooky music, and they said surely they wouldn't have made it do that. And I was like, yes, that's brilliant. That's what I wanted. So that was quite fun. I liked adding like little touches like that maybe only one or two people would notice. Another thing I did, what I'm just going to do is save this game. I think it just saves automatically anyway, but I'm going to go back to sandbox mode. And is that the quit? Okay, yes.
Well, that's confusing. I can't.
Yeah, I don't find it a very intuitive interface here. So if I go to sandbox mode, there's a particular ride I want to build, so I just want to have all rides unlocked. So there's a ride in... But by the way, before I do this, we should mention this guy, the park inspector. So apparently, like, this guy was inspired by you, is that right?
Yeah, so when you put that cheat in the car, that is basically, they made a version of me that's driving, and they reused Park Inspector because that's based off me.
Yeah.
To kind of make that character that's in the car. I've got more hair than he has still.
Yeah, thank you. Yes,
although
more hair than that.
I'm rapidly losing it.
I have had my own depictions in games, like in Dog's Life on the PlayStation 2. There's like a hot air balloon, and the artist who did that kind of modelled the person in the balloon after me, although it's not really visible. It's not really hard to actually see, and it's very low poly, but so we've both kind of been immortalised in some respects. So what I was going to show is there's a ride called I guess under thrill rides. It's very annoying you can't resize this interface. I guess you can shrink stuff down like that. It's called Robot Arm. Do you remember this one? Where is it? There it is. Yeah, so this was added in Wild, and this was kind of a hard ride to balance in terms of like it being worth the build because it can only carry 2 people at once. I don't remember if I fully dealt with that problem, but one thing I did with this is you have the people in the park, the guests, having thoughts about the rides. Like they'll think like, Wooden Roller Coaster 1 was a lot of fun or something like that. So for the robot arm, I had this idea that let's see if anyone actually goes on this. Maybe I'll take the price down. I mean, there we go. Someone's going on it. So
I was going to say, I think the price you can charge for that one's quite high because you only get like 2 people in it.
Yeah, it seems like it'd be hard to ever make a profit from this. Yeah. Oh yeah, you see here. So Robot Arm 1 has thoughts about the people. So the people normally have just thoughts about the rides. I made it so this ride could have thoughts about the people that go on it. So Robot Arm 1 says, in fact, if I click on this, it just shows in here. Jill R's carbon-based organs repulse me. Dick S must be destroyed at all costs. So it basically has the kind of personality of like some kind of mad robot that wants to destroy humans. So I really enjoyed just doing this. I just did this on my own whim and just added the text for it. I just wrote some lines that I thought were funny and had the robot arm thinking about the people. I don't remember if I ever even said like, do you mind if I do this? I just did it, I think. Or maybe I did. I don't fully remember. But and the other thing is, do you remember the VIPs?
Yeah, I do.
We had these VIPs that were like a new thing for RCT3. Yeah, so there was one who was like a politician called Clint Bushton.
Yeah,
looked like Bill Clinton, and there was like there was something called like Pop Star, and there were a few others. There were also VIPs for the expansion packs. There was an exclusive VIP for Soaked called Bob Waterman. The joke about him was that he's like a silver medal winner of swimming, so he'd go around in his swimming trunks, and the joke was like, he never reached gold or something, and he'd talk about that, how he came silver or whatever, something. I'm sure it was funnier than that. And there was a guy who was like some kind of explorer or something for Wild. But what I did also, I had the robot arm have special thoughts for the VIPs. So in the rare case the VIP actually went on the robot arm, it would have specific thoughts about. Maybe it was just now that I think about it, it wasn't specific thoughts for each VIP. It was just specific thoughts for VIPs in general. So it would say stuff like, or think stuff like, I am more important than Clint Bushton and stuff like that. And I've also just remembered the other thing I did was if I make another robot arm, and place that down. There it is. I'll turn this one on. Oh yeah, it also thinks about itself. I am perfection. I don't remember when or how this happens, but they also kind of communicate with each other. Like they have thoughts to each other. See this one here. Ethan N, all your base belong to me. Remember that meme?
Oh, we're dating it now, though.
Yeah. This is very much of its time. So when do these rides actually think about each other? I don't know if it's just random or like how it actually works. Like when they'll say something like Robot Arm 2 will say something like Robot Arm 1 join me in wiping out humanity or something like that. So again, that was quite a fun thing.
It's not connected to a path.
I don't know if it would make a difference. I could try adding that, but it might just be random. I don't remember when it actually happens. But yeah, I did that. So again, I don't know how many people ever noticed that, but it's the kind of thing I like doing, just having some weird little things in the game, and if one person, because the thing is, like, it might be not many people see it, but the people who do see it will really like it. So that was kind of my idea of that kind of thing, and just also to keep myself entertained. Like even though like in some ways kind of working games was my dream job, but at the same time, if you're doing something for years, you'll get bored of it eventually, and you need ways of keeping yourself entertained. It makes a difference that if you work on like new projects, it's like, oh, here's something new to work on. But we were working on like, I guess you were working on RCT games for about 3 or 4 years, weren't you? If you include the RCT2 ones, and then I was working on RCT3 and expansion packs for, I guess maybe 1.5 years or 2 years or something like that.
I was on some sort of roller coaster game for about 4 years because I did Trouble and Trouble 2.
So I also did, I did those as well. So that in total we were doing like many years. Like, because Thrill was meant to be like, we were bringing Roller Coaster Tycoon to consoles, but there are inherent limitations that come with that because like these consoles have limited power and limited memory, and you can't just keep on building stuff because you run out of memory. So like Thrill had the power meter, which was like limit how much you could build, and then people on the forums were like, how can I disable the power meter? Not realizing that, like, well, if you could disable the power meter, the game would crash because you'd be building too much stuff and you'd run out of memory. That was the whole thing with that one. That's just the same thought we saw before. So we're not seeing thoughts between the robot arms, but that is one of the things I added that I quite enjoyed adding. I'm just seeing if there's any other questions on the Reddit. Someone was asking, was it always going to be full 3D or was it going to be isometric? Yes, it was going to be full 3D. That was part of the point of bringing it across to Frontier and having a whole team do it. Because like it was, I don't remember exactly how many people, but it was probably about like 15 to 20 people working on the game for a year to do this game.
I think we knew that we weren't going to get everybody on board if we made it 3D. But that
it was a pretty cool thing, like just seeing the rides. Like that was like, because there was nothing else really doing that, like being able to ride the rides.
Yeah.
So that was the whole idea of it, really. Someone was asking. Sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just trying to remember what the first ride that we put in was, and I think it was. They called the Twister or something. It was a flat ride.
Yeah. So it did still have the ride cam for the flat rides. It's definitely one of the more interesting ones to watch, this one.
Oh yeah, it's Twist. I reckon that was the first ride we put in.
There is someone asking here whether Chris Sawyer was heavily involved, which I think the answer is no.
Not at all.
No, I think we got his code, and I wasn't involved with any of the early conversations, but I assume the conversation was, Atari wants to do Roller Coaster Tycoon in 3D. Chris Sawyer, clearly can't. He's not going to do it on his own, and maybe didn't want to do it at that point. I think he was pretty rich by that point anyway, so maybe didn't feel the need to spend years more working on a game.
Yeah, he just wanted to get on with Transport Tycoon.
Oh yeah. So because he did another one, did he, of the Transport Tycoon?
Yeah.
Was that Transport Tycoon 2?
I think that was one did next. And I don't think we ever saw him in all the time that I worked on it or talked to him.
No. I tried the open source version of Transport Tycoon about a year ago, and I couldn't really understand how to play it. It seems like the kind of game I might be interested in playing. I've played other games like that. There's one called Train Valley World recently it's not quite the same thing, but it's kind of similar in some ways. There's one about cheat codes. So, because there were various cheat codes you can enter, some of which were our names, like I'm a cheat code. There are other team members who are cheat codes. And someone's asking, were they based on what people worked on? And they were asking about the coaster friction, because they were saying the coaster friction in RCT3 is slightly higher than RCT2, but you could enter a cheat code to change the friction to be slightly lower to make kind of imported coasters compatible, and they could actually reach the finish. I don't remember if actually the cheat codes did have any relation to what people did.
No.
I don't even remember what the one. If I just look up RCT3,
I think we just picked certain people to have certain cheats assigned to them.
Yeah, I'm just looking up the cheat codes now, but yeah, I think maybe my name was it Andrew Thomas? He was one of the people working on rides and track pieces. I think was it him who was the coaster? I mean the friction fix. I think he was the thing for the fix of the track friction to make it slightly lower. My name is increased park value. Peep Cam is Johnny Watts, who was the producer of the game. So there are a few of those like that. And let me just check the questions again. One thing I will mention regarding the cheat codes. So we use certain codes as like a test. Like you could name people certain names. So you see here we've got a person called Jeremy G. If I go to their stats, I'm going to rename him to Hungry Bob. And what this means is his hunger need will go up a lot faster than normal. And we would use this, I use this to test things like stalls, like food stalls. Because if you've got people in the park and they're not hungry, but you want them to use the food stall to test that the food stall works, or test something about the food stall, then you want the hunger need to go up. So we'd have these various codes for that. I assume that'll go up soon. But there was one occasion where, I think it was after they released the original game, I saw a guest walking around just randomly, and their name was, I'll just type it in here, Mustafa P. So I saw this and I had the idea, like, what if that meant their toilet need goes up faster? Because A, I can use that for testing, and B, it's just quite funny, I think. So I said to Johnny, do you mind if I make it? Because the thing is, the other names like Hungry Bob, they're never going to be generated automatically by the game. This was a name that was generated automatically. But obviously it's going to be very rare. It's just going to be by chance. So I said, like, do you mind if I just make it so if the guest is called Mustafa P, then they need the toilet? He said, that's fine. So I did it. So I think that was quite funny. Again, like, most people don't know about that. I think I mentioned it on the like on Twitter or on the RCT3 Reddit and so on recently. But obviously, it's the kind of thing that amuses me, but most people are never going to realise it's even in the game. And there's someone asking about quirks about the AI and the group system. I mentioned earlier about the bug where people weren't going on the rides so much. I'm sure there were bugs related to the group system because it was definitely more complex than the original system where people are just individuals. But I don't remember any particular bugs specifically. But I'm sure there were bugs, that we had to fix that were related to that. Do you remember any particular bugs while working on the game? I guess there's so many that it's hard to remember.
Yeah, I don't remember that. I don't recall any off the top of my head.
Unless the bug is like super memorable. Sometimes you get a bug that's just so funny that it's super memorable. Like I guess the one I mentioned earlier about the diving boards, where the people would just hit the ground rather than the pool. That's a memorable bug, but most bugs are not memorable. So I guess you're not going to remember.
No, we have more memorable bugs on other games that I've worked on.
Yeah.
We didn't particularly have a lot on Roller Coaster Tycoon.
Someone asks, who came up with the James Hunt Dune buggy cheat and did they get a raise for it? Well, I don't know if he got a raise. That was, I believe, created by programmer Matthew Halpin, who often wrote cool things like this, and I think he did the whole physics system for when the coasters crash and so on. I'm sure he did get a raise as time went on because he was a very good programmer. So I don't know if it was specifically for the buggy, but it kind of showed he was capable of doing some quite cool stuff like that maybe other programmers wouldn't have thought or bothered to do. Because I don't remember who actually had the idea of doing the physics system for when the coasters crashed, like if that was his idea or someone else's idea. But he was the one who made it happen.
I remember.
I'm seeing if there's any other questions on here. Were there any particular elements for the first games the devs of RCT3 looked back on, and so we have to make sure this makes it into our game? Well, there's one I mentioned earlier about the guest kind of summary screen, I guess you'd call it, which is broken in this complete edition. So there's two invisible buttons here, one of which is the one that shows this summary of what they're doing, and you can show the thoughts. It's very hard to actually understand what's going on in your park without this. Like, you only need this to actually get an overall sense of, because you can also see whether people are happy or not. You can get an instant kind of sense of is your park going well or not, and what's wrong. And there's also this one here, which I think I added as well. You see, it looks a bit kind of placeholder. It's not the most clean, nicely designed screen, but I think it's quite useful to have this information. I'm not really a kind of designer in terms of visual design, so I just made it happen basically. But I think mostly it was just trying to get the stuff that was in the original game working in this game, just all the basics and all that kind of thing. And just seeing if there's any more questions. Did you have any idea that RCT2 would have a cult following 20 plus years later? And knowing how the community has kept it alive, is there anything you'd do differently with RCT3? So I think basically they're alluding to the fact that maybe people have more fondness for RCT2 than RCT3. And again, I think that's because of the vibe the game has with its very distinctive pixel graphics. I guess back then they were just graphics, we wouldn't really call it pixel art, but now we'd call it pixel art. And it has a very distinctive kind of soundtrack and just kind of atmosphere, which that's kind of the hardest stuff to replicate, especially again in a kind of early 3D game. So that's probably the main reason. I mean, I'm not an expert in these kind of games. Maybe there's other reasons why people like RCT2, but I think surely the biggest thing must be the vibe of the game and the look of it and so on. I don't know if you have any particular thoughts on that.
No, like I said earlier, we tried where we could to have that kind of vibe still, but obviously we want to put our own spin on it to some degree.
Yeah.
But I don't really think, I don't feel that we did a bad job. Maybe some people have a different view on that.
Yeah.
And are more fond for those kind of games. But I've had quite a lot of people come up to me when they found out I worked on Roller Coaster Tycoon 3. And I think you were saying this earlier when we were chatting beforehand. And people have nostalgia as much for that as they do Roller Coaster Tycoon 2.
Yeah. Partly also is what people grew up with as well.
Yeah.
Like if RCT2 was the first one they played, they probably got more nostalgia for that. But if they played RCT3 first, then that's what they have nostalgia for. I think, I said before, like when we were talking, you find, like, as a developer, I worked on many games and some of them were better than others. I mean, none of them were necessarily bad in general, but definitely some games are better than others. But when you look on YouTube or whatever, there's like, for every single game I worked on, even the ones that weren't the best in some ways, there's people saying, "Oh, this was my favorite game as a kid." But part of that, I guess, is like, maybe you have lower standards when you're a kid, but also like that is your first game, and that every game has something to offer in general, unless they're really bad.
I mean, I think that some sequels that other companies have attempted haven't worked out that well, and nobody really has good things to say about them. But I don't think with Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 that was the case, really.
So I'm just checking the remaining credit. That might be all of them, actually. Is that, or any others?
Yeah. It feels like some people are more negative about more recent ones, and possibly with good reason, given the sort of microtransactions around them.
Yeah, I mean, I've not really followed like the other. I guess there's Parkitect. I've not seen that. I've not tried that one, like Parkitect game. I don't know if it was well received or not, but I guess the Atari ones. I assume what happened. I don't really know what happened with those, but I assume they were trying to develop with a fairly inexperienced team on a low budget. I don't know what these teams did before those, like Roller Coaster Tycoon World, or was there another one? Did they do another one after that? I don't remember.
I think there were a couple, and I think I can't remember which one it was, but one had about 2 or 3 different teams work on it, and basically still wasn't great when it launched.
I think essentially Atari as a publisher today is like, obviously it has the name of the company from the 80s and 70s, but it's a different company, and it's even very much a different company from what it was like 20 years ago. And I'm not sure they've actually had any like major hits in the last, since RCT3, I guess, in some respects. So obviously if that's the case, I don't know what their finances are. They're going to have less budget to work with, and that's going to affect what you can get in terms of like the experience and so on of the teams and how much time they can spend working on the game. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff online about like lazy developers or whatever. Like most developers, even the ones who are working on less prominent teams, are working very hard and they want to make a good game, but there are various things that can go wrong, and part of that is just not being given enough time or enough budget, or there are many things that can go wrong with game development, so you can't really often blame the teams. And but it's like kind of I guess in terms of development, you kind of get what you pay for to a certain extent. Obviously, some teams can make a lot happen with a small budget, but if you're trying to make a game with a lot of content, and especially it's not just content in terms of like the the rides and all that, but all these systems. There's all these different systems in the game, and they have to work together and be designed in such a way that it's going to work nicely. And I do wonder, like, maybe they could have just, because I don't know what access the teams for stuff like RCT World had in terms of, like, did they have access to the RCT3 source code, or did they have to just do everything from scratch? Because now Atari fully owns RCT3, but for a long time it was essentially jointly owned by Atari and Frontier. But recently Atari bought the full rights to RCT, so essentially Frontier have no ownership over it anymore. But yeah, I don't know if those teams working on those other games had access to any of the code from the previous games that they could use to help, make their own games. I don't know how that was done. So I think that's actually, I can't think of much else in terms of, like, what I might just quickly do is quit out of this sandbox, have a quick look at one of the other two, like maybe one or two other scenarios, maybe fairly briefly, just to see which ones there are. Because again, like, even when I played, like, was working on the game originally, obviously there are a lot of missions. A lot of these probably I didn't even look at the time, or maybe like I'd occasionally get like a save game with a bug in it I'd need to look at. But in general, I just load up the sandbox or load up the first mission just for testing stuff. So probably a lot of these missions I've not even looked at. I don't necessarily have the patience or the degree of love for the game to actually want to play through all these missions. Let's have a look at this one. The CIA. Okay. Start game. So this is... I do remember this scenery here.
This is space scenery, isn't it?
I definitely recognise this. I've definitely seen this before. I mean, it makes sense because I worked on the game, but it may have been in the form of seeing a level that someone had made and then, like, seeing some, like, bugs in it or whatever. What I might just do is just take a very brief look at some of the other ones, or even just like the... So I guess that's meant to be... that's Clint Bushton, one of the VIPs. So I assume these are meant to be the screenshots from that specific scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, I think each one has a story, almost in
Let's try this one.
Well, I hate to say it, theme park type way.
Oh, yeah. Getting a bit of a glitchy... Oh, stop now. There's a kind of glitchy effect on the water there.
Yeah,
I definitely remember this.
That was on that level. I'm not sure why. Probably never got to the bottom of it. No, I don't think so.
I remember these ducks that you could click on to make the feathers fly off. That was a thing that I think perhaps the idea from that came from Dog's Life on the PS2, where it was kind of a weird game where one of the things you could do is, as a dog, pick up a chicken or a cat and then shake it to shake off either the fur or the feathers, which is kind of cruel, but yeah, it has this kind of... I guess that's where the idea of that came from. I'm just trying to see, like, if I click on the water, it does make a little ripple, I think. Or is that just my mouse movement? So if I leave it still and then just move it... Oh, it is just the movement. It's quite a nice effect. It would have been pretty exciting back in 2004, whenever it was, to see this kind of water effect. Not maybe quite so exciting now. But it's a nice little thing. Let's look at one or two soaked or wild expansions, just see what those look like, and then we'll maybe finish for now. So if I go soaked.
I do remember in one expansion, I can't remember which, but there was a directive to put some advertising.
Oh yeah,
into the game.
Yeah, I'll show that in a moment. We did do something about. I don't know if that ever actually came to fruition. Like, so I mentioned a programmer before called Rick Griffiths, and he did various things. One thing he did was the tunnels for the coasters when you tunnel underground. But another thing he did was these billboards. So if I try it on here, actually, if I go scenery, see billboards, custom image. So I think the idea of this was can I actually... Okay.
I think you need to put some pictures into your folder.
It's like looking in the old name of what my pictures used to be called. I don't think I can actually change the folder. But like the idea of this originally was you'd have these advertising boards and they would actually show real-time ads in the game that were taken from the internet, and like Frontier or Atari would be paid to have ads showing in the game, which obviously like these days you generally think that's pretty tacky, and I guess people thought that then, but it was kind of a new thing. Like people were experimenting with like other ways of making money from games, and this was one of the things. Like we had this in Dog's Life, where I don't know if it was just the UK US version, but one of the versions had like pedigree dog food adverts like all over the game. Like you'd see like a can of pedigree dog food, and there'd be like a big pedigree logo and so on. And so like people were trying these new approaches to making money, and obviously in-game ads was one. But we were working with this system that would like supply the ads from a server, and I'm not sure if that ever actually went ahead in terms of the actual servers working or like actually doing anything with these ads. But the cool thing about this was that you could add your own custom images if you put the pictures in the right place, and then just show them in the game. So I guess that was really good for people doing scenery. They could then just make their own. They could really customize their part by adding their own pictures. So it's kind of like it's something that started for kind of I guess like annoying kind of capitalist reasons, and then became something that became quite a useful creative tool.
I remember pushing to get that done, and then just causing like a bug in an alpha build that crashed the game.
In terms of the custom images?
Yeah. Which was a problem at the time, but it added something that I think was valuable to the players. Not just having advertising that then didn't really work.
One thing I was going to mention about these missions, I was saying before that like the missions on RCT3 were, you could just take as much time as you wanted. I must say I feel I'm not really a fan of these kind of. I'm just going to try a wild mission to see what those look like. But the kind of in-game objectives like the apprentice and whatever. I'm not really a fan of when games just say like, "Oh, do this, then do this, then do this." Like in RCT1, it would say like make this amount of money by year 3 or that kind of thing. Whereas here it's like I saw one earlier on the Soaked mission where it said something like have a ride with a minimum excitement of 3, which I guess is a pretty low bar. But like I expect to do some of these missions, players would just like place down a certain ride, achieve the mission, and then delete the ride because they didn't actually want that ride in their park. Because I quite like the idea of just like making your own park that's your own creation and doing what you want to do to actually kind of win the mission, rather than the game saying, "Hey, why not build 3 log flumes and a burger stand or something." Like from my point of view, it's like, well, it's my park. I want to make what I want to make, rather than the game just saying make this. That is something that I guess that's my preference. It was the same kind of thing. I tried Planet Coaster 2 the other day, and maybe it's partly because it's just a training mission, but I don't know to what extent the other missions are like that as well. I assume most of them are pretty similar to that kind of thing, where they say do this specific thing. Like it might say like buy 3 elephants rather than like buy 3 of whatever animals you want, or just make money how you want to make money. But I guess that's just a preference, really. I do like this. It's like a leopard or something, like this leopard entrance. That's quite funny. Was that meant to be a saber-toothed tiger or something? Or was that just a leopard? I don't know. I don't know if leopards' fangs are that long. Probably not. But yeah, I'm not an expert on leopards myself. Yeah, it definitely was fun to like work on Wild and see all these little animals walking around and see the models that were made. I guess the other fun thing in Wild was the do you remember the dark cam? Maybe we'll finish with that for now, but let's release an animal. In fact, if I just create a new animal or build a new animal, maybe I guess the word is buy an animal, not build an animal.
Idea almost came from Jurassic Park, right?
Oh yeah. So if I do let's do a leopard. Let's put the leopard by the leopard entrance. Can I place it there? I guess I have to place it on the flat ground. So you could just, obviously the animals could escape, or you could just drop an animal in the park and then people start running away. People
start panicking, which is always funny as well.
So the animals, the carnivores wouldn't actually eat the humans. They would eat like herbivores. Like the herbivore would turn into a pile of meat.
But, pile of meat. Again, something I had to set up.
Oh yeah, that's pretty cool. I guess they felt doing that with the humans was a step too far. But if I go to the so I think I just click on it. Where's it gone? There it is.
Behind the tree.
So if I click on it, you get this dart cam. So it's not. I guess it's not the kind of thing you expect to see in a theme park game. So it's quite a fun little addition. You have to lead it. I guess the easiest way is just wait for it to stand still, because it's quite hard to hit when it's running. Oh, there we go. That's it. So there we go. It's quite a cool addition to the game. And I can just put it back into the... I guess this is not the best place to put it, because this is like a herbivore enclosure.
With the elephant, yeah.
Yeah, and the giraffe. I don't know if actually...
It's meat, so we can watch that, right?
I don't know if the giraffe is too big for it, but maybe it will hunt the giraffe. I don't know if there's like a limit on how big, or small the animal has to be before it will hunt something.
What's it going? It's hot. It's going to get the elephant. No.
So can I actually... I'm pretty sure I wrote some of the text for this as well. Like, I wish I could be friends with Laurie the leopard. I'm pretty sure I wrote that. I've always liked doing funny bits of dialogue in games. Like I've always done a bit of writing, and I guess that is another thing I did on it. Obviously, I was saying I was primarily a programmer and that kind of thing, but I did just do little bits of text there and there and write stuff I thought was funny. Speaking of which, I should mention my game that I'm working on. So I'm working on a game called Reality Drift. It's very different from Roller Coaster Tycoon. It's kind of like a retro style racing game with roguelike elements. And one thing I've enjoyed doing for that game is writing some quite funny dialogue. At least I think it's funny. What I'm going to do, we'll finish this in a moment. I'm going to put the trailer of my game at the end of this video so people can have a look at that and see if they like it, and hopefully wishlist it on Steam. That will make a big difference. So yeah, one thing I've done in that game is having some like funny characters and some hopefully humorous dialogue that I've written. I'm quite pleased with how that's turned out. Yeah, this one here, see this one here, Laurie the leopard looks like Sophia K. So Sophia K is one of their group members. So they're basically like saying, they basically take, a random group member and say, this leopard looks a bit like, my dad or whatever, that kind of thing. Yeah, I'm not sure I have that much more to say about RCT3. It was an interesting kind of game to work on, and as I said, me having played the first game and coming onto this one was pretty exciting. And I guess for both of us, this probably was the most successful game both of us worked on. Is that right? In many ways.
Well, yeah, it's the most successful game that I've worked on. Probably, I'd say, yeah.
I mean, I think this game, obviously it came from a successful series, and I think this game, brought in a lot of money. I don't know exactly how many it sold, but I think it funded Frontier for a long time. Frontier worked on a game called The Outsider for years after this, and I think a lot of that was able to be funded because of RCT3 and the success of that game. Unfortunately, The Outsider didn't work out too well. It was a game that was kind of essentially in development hell for 5 years and then was cancelled. So a lot of people worked for years on this game that never came out. So that's a bit of a shame, but it shows funny enough, I was on the other team from The Outsider, and while they were making The Outsider, we did so there was Thrillville, Thrill of the Rails, there was some cancelled projects as well on that team, I guess, but there was also stuff like Connectimals. I guess that was after. Was that the same time as Outsider? I think that was the last project we were doing at the same time while Outsider was happening, and then that game was cancelled and the team was brought together onto one game, which was the Connect Disneyland game. So yeah, it was a kind of cool game to work on, and when people ask me, when I say I work in games, because as I said, I do private tutoring, and that's most of what I do, but also I do work on my own game when I've got time, which is quite a lot at the moment. But obviously I had this career in the industry, and when I say to people I work in games or used to work in games, they'll say did you work on Baldur's Gate 3 or some recent popular game they've heard of? But I'll say I worked on this as the most successful game I worked on, at least in terms of sales, and that's probably the one people remember the most. I mean, some people will say, I played RCT2 or RCT1 in some cases, but obviously it is and was quite a popular game. It still is, I guess. So I'm sure I'll think of something else interesting to say once we finish this video, but I think that's all I've thought of for now. So yeah, thanks a lot, Stuart, for joining me and
All right.
sharing your memories of that. And yeah, I'm going to follow this video with the trailer for my game Reality Drift. As I said, please wishlist it. It means a lot to me if people do that. It makes a big difference. I'm just like one person working part-time, and also I have an artist, freelance artist, also working part-time. But I'm pretty pleased with what we're doing, so hopefully some people will like what they see when they see the trailer. Okay, so thanks then, and goodbye.
Bye.